Before I start, be aware that names have been changed to protect the innocent and to ensure the accused receives a fair trial. No matter how great we men think our lives will turn out, some unseen force can always come along and derail us, sometimes permanently, from our course. Whether we achieve the nuclear family with 2.5 children or end up living with our parents, a single, childless in cell at 45, no one can predict their future. Perhaps the best way for me to illustrate my point is to tell you the story of Darren Sellers, my former best friend. No matter if we would have grown up in Dallas or the little hick town we were doomed to reside in, Darren would have always been a special kid. Doctor, lawyer, pro football player, he could have excelled at any profession he put his mind to. Since childhood, he was always that kid that did better than his peers at everything. I know he was speaking at an abnormally early age and reading by 4. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if he came out of his mother's womb potty trained. I think you get the idea. He was a very special kid who should have become someone great. Except, he didn't. By high school, he was already beginning to show some alarming traits. A pastime that he and I had always enjoyed, collecting and cataloging skulls and antlers from dead animals, would eventually evolve into killing and skinning neighborhood pets for him. While I found this aspect of the hobby to be a strange tangent to take, it wasn't odd enough to affect our friendship. The way he would treat his girlfriends, however, would. Growing up in a very small town, we'd known almost every girl since kindergarten. Some had been close friends. Either way, because of his popularity, he had his pick of them. Regardless of who she was, if Darren decided to date her, he would always end up treating her badly. A committed relationship meant nothing to him. A lot of really kind girls would get their hearts broken because of him, but to be honest, they would be the lucky ones. Sarah, a very smart and cute girl, was with Darren on and off for several years. She would break up with him after he hit her, but go back after he apologized. A week didn't go by that I wouldn't have to give him a chewing out for his behavior, but it made no difference. It was like his body had been taken over by the soul of a stranger, and the guy I'd grown up with was fading into the background. None of this would hurt his standing at the school. He graduated first in our class and received a full ride to Texas A&M. I was no slouch myself, coming in at 6th out of a class of 100, but for me, I'd have to get scholarships if I wanted to go to college. After deciding on UT in Austin, Darren and I went our separate ways. We wouldn't see each other for almost 2 years, and when we finally did get together to catch up, things had changed drastically. I hadn't returned home my entire first year. Money was far more important to me, and little still existed to draw me back when I wasn't working. Darren and I spoke maybe a handful of times. Never, during any of those conversations, did he mention problems at A&M. However, during a phone call with my folks just before Christmas break, my sophomore year, my mom said that Darren had dropped out of college and returned home a month prior. I'd already made plans to visit for a week during the holiday. Now I had a lot of questions to ask. We met up my first night in town and drove to Dallas to visit a club or two. I decided not to deluge Darren with a bunch of questions. He would probably fill me in when he was ready. While sitting at the first club, he finally opened up about his time at College Station. Things had been going well for a while until he started smoking more and attending class less. The anonymity among all those strangers made it hard to make friends. The few people he did meet would lead him down a dark path. He said by the start of year 2, he knew his days were numbered, so he dropped out to save the school the trouble of kicking him out. This was a much different person than the one I'd left just a year and a half prior. I'd never known Darren to embrace failure. Other than the goatee and long hair, he appeared to be the same, but now he just didn't seem to care about what happened to him. Going from a full scholarship at A&M to delivering pizzas would have destroyed the old Darren, but now he acted like he loved his new life. While driving to our next stop, he suggested we pick up a girl and have some fun with her. I laughed at first, thinking he meant maybe buying a hooker or something. I said, "Yeah, right, I'll save my money, thank you." I'd misinterpreted his meaning apparently. He said he meant that we should grab a girl from the street and take turns with her. The suggestion shocked me. I looked over his face, trying to find a sign he was joking, but couldn't. For a few minutes, nothing was said between us. I still couldn't believe what he'd said. Then an odd idea struck me out of nowhere. "Have you done that kind of thing before?" He hesitated at first, but eventually admitted he and his friends had done it a few times back in College Station. As if it would make things less serious, he stressed that they never hurt the girls or anything. Once they had their fun, they'd drop her off and go on their way. The outright disgust I felt at that moment very nearly overwhelmed me, but I held myself together. Maybe next time I visit. I had no intention of taking part in anything like that. My words were simply meant to diffuse any hostile feelings he may have been harboring at that second. All I could think of was getting away from him. I faked feeling sick and suggested we head home. He didn't seem like he was mad about it. I dodged his calls for the rest of the week and returned to Austin that Friday. We would speak one more time at the end of the school year. He was wondering if I would be coming home for the summer, but I told him I wasn't sure when I'd be back because of work. I wasn't lying. If I wanted to pay for school, I had to work almost every day to do it. He sounded a little bummed out hearing this, and for a minute, I felt bad for him. However, it wasn't long until I remembered our trip to Dallas. If I'm being honest, I'd actually decided our friendship was over that night. Something that had always been lurking under the surface of his personality had been freed while he was at A&M. And now he couldn't put it back in its cage. The second he joined the others in their fun and games, he ceased to be the friend I knew, forever. Not long after that last call, my mom sent me an email containing a newspaper story. Although it didn't mention the name of the attacker, my mother told me later that it was Darren. I guess after he realized I wasn't coming back anytime soon, he went hunting by himself and got caught. Perhaps the most tragic part of that story is that the woman lost her life. Without the backup of his college friends, he lacked the power to control his victim and took things farther than he ever needed to before, at least as far as we know. Because of the seriousness of the charges, he's been in the Collin County Jail for the past few years and has no hope of bail. Barring any mistakes made by the police, the case appears to be open and shut. That means he'll be inside for 30 years, at a minimum. For the sake of women everywhere, let's hope he never gets out. This happened to me during my yearly campout at Lake Texoma in North Texas. The lake itself was built during the Second World War using mainly German POW labor. It sits astride the Texas/Oklahoma border and covers roughly 89,000 acres and sees about 6 million visitors on an average year. To my knowledge, it's still one of the biggest reservoirs in the country and my favorite place to spend my birthday. Every year, the week before or after spring break, I load my camping supplies into my car and make the 30-mile drive. My usual place to set up is Eisenhower State Park, located on the Texas side of the border and just happens to be named after Dwight D. Eisenhower, the famous World War II general and president who was born nearby. The cool thing about the park is that for a small fee, I can take my pick of spots that offer running water and electrical connections. Although I normally camp in a relatively traditional manner, having access to power nearby can be convenient. Perhaps the best part of camping so early in the season is that the temperatures are still reasonable. You could go out as little as 2 months later and already be nearing 90+ degrees during the hottest part of the day. This also means there are far fewer other campers in the park. I've been visiting the lake since before I can remember. As a matter of fact, one of my first memories is of me bawling my head off and holding my bloody foot. My dad sped our boat to shore in order for me to get the medical care I required after stepping on a broken bottle. We all wore shoes in the water after that. In all my years of going out there, I'd never heard anything about wild packs of dogs roaming the area. While groups of wild pigs have been an ever-growing problem in our state, wild dogs not so much. Or maybe that's just my ignorance showing, and it's a bigger deal than I am aware of. Whether it is or not, I wasn't expecting what happened on my second night. I believe that evening, no one else was within a mile of my camp. It was just starting to get dark, and I walked a few feet down to the water. Oftentimes, I'll sit on the shore and watch boats cross the lake with a cup of coffee and enjoy the calming sounds of the waves licking lightly at the shore. It hadn't gotten completely dark yet, but the shapes I noticed approaching me were unidentifiable. As they grew closer, I could make out the shape of two dogs walking slowly down the shore. I figured they belonged to another camper and called out to let them know I was there. As the seconds passed, no answer came, and the dogs continued to get closer. While I'm not, nor have ever been afraid of dogs, I do practice common sense measures with those I'm not familiar with. When they were within about 10 yards of me, I saw 3 more dogs, all of different sizes, come down the cliff at an angle from me and join the other 2 on the bank. My caution was beginning to shift into fear. Odds are, if a group of dogs forms a pack without the moderating influence of a human, they become feral and can be a serious danger to any person they come in contact with. I was that person on this night, and things would only prove to get worse as it went on. Running away would just engage their prey drive, and I'd be run down and mauled for sure. With no other choice, I stood still as they approached me. The 2 larger dogs I had seen first began to smell me. I didn't move or pet them as they did so. While the leader sniffed, the other 3 began to surround me and walk slowly toward me. Even if I'd never been scared of dogs before, this freaked me out. During this whole interaction, I did my best not to indicate I was scared, but the nearer the other 3 came, the more nervous I grew. Things would come to a head when I felt one of them bump me on the back of the leg. I did the worst thing I could have and jerked away. This was all the pack needed to begin attacking me. Each of the leaders had grabbed me, one on the hand and the other had a mouthful of my leg. The rest had ganged up and took a firm grip on my right leg. This wasn't some rough play either. I could tell they were trying to pull me down to the ground. I quickly lost my balance and dropped to one knee, but fortunately for me, I had a makeshift walking stick in my right hand and used it to break my fall. One of the leaders used this as an opportunity to go for my face. However, I foresaw something like this and jabbed at it with the stick before it reached me. This gave me the time I needed to return myself to standing. With a firmer stance, I started jabbing at the others. A few let go and backed off only to renew their attack seconds later. Rage and frustration began to take over, and I started swinging wildly at them. Here and there, I'd hear a screech come from the darkness until, finally, the assault ceased. I stood my ground and waited for it to begin again, but the pounding of my heart was all I could hear. To be safe, I walked slowly back up the hill to my camp, watching the whole time for any movement in the darkness. When I reached it, I turned up my lamps and searched for wounds. My left hand was bloody, but after washing it, I could see it wasn't as bad as I had feared. The bad bites were to the back and sides of my calves. The best I could do was clean and wrap them until help could get to me. The gates didn't close until 10 p.m. that day, so the ambulance was able to scoop me up and get me to a hospital rather easily. I spent the rest of the evening getting treated. Among the procedures was my first set of rabies shots. I was overjoyed to learn the procedure is far less extreme than it was when I was a kid. Although you still have to get the vaccine over several appointments, science has made major strides in this area. The following morning, I called a friend to pick me up and take me back out to break my camp. I made sure to notify the office about the attack, but I don't know if anything was ever done. I watched the evening news and checked the paper for 2 weeks. Nothing about the dog packs or my attack was ever mentioned. For all I know, the decision was made to handle the problem quietly and avoid any hits to the coming tourist season. The last few times I have camped there since the attack, I haven't encountered any feral dogs, so perhaps that's what was done. My run-in with the dogs motivated me to finally get my license to carry a handgun. I'd been wanting to do it since the law was passed, but could never justify it to myself. In addition to carrying while out and about in public, concealed to prevent any problems with the general population, I'm legally allowed to bring my pistol along with me when I go camping. Since I believe self-protection is a right, I probably would have it with me whether it was legal or not, but thankfully, I don't have to take that chance. My goal by sharing this is not to create fear among others who love staying in the outdoors. I simply want to remind people that even in places we feel comfortable, the unexpected can happen. So, if you're ever visiting Texas, I highly recommend Lake Texoma and the attractions around it. Just be sure to wear your life jacket when you're on the water, don't drink too much, and keep your eyes open for the creatures who share the land with you. Whether they're rattlesnakes or feral dogs, one misstep or loss of concentration could really ruin your day. Not a month before my grandpa passed, he sat me down and told me a story about his childhood in Texas. To my knowledge, very little has been said concerning this time in his life. Perhaps that's why what I was about to hear shocked me so deeply. Somewhere in the wide expanse of forest between the Louisiana line and Paris, I dare not be any more specific than this, my family had a small bit of land, roughly 150 acres. This was a lot more than most, but with generation after generation staying on the land, room got scarce quick. My people had been about the area since Texas was still its own country, and life back in those days was no place for the meek. Squabbles were handled between neighbors, and the law often came at the end of a gun. My daddy had me out and hunting for food as soon as I could shoot. This was Depression times, and folks did whatever they could to make ends meet, laws be damned. My mother had an older brother who'd already been in and out of the penitentiary twice for making liquor. When my schooling or chores didn't see me busy, I'd make a little money watching over the still. The local law dogs generally turned a blind eye to folks' personal enterprises and sometimes engaged in the practice themselves. Government revenue agents were the real thorn in our side. Their meddlesome ways could derail a man's income for an entire season, and this was in a time legitimate jobs were thin on the ground. As I said, during the winter months, I'd make a bit watching over my uncles still stuck off in the far corner of the property. Revenue agents always being a burden on us, I was to keep a keen eye out for them and dissuade any other folk of a curious disposition from walking up on the manufacturing. Being a pretty young man at the time, near on 12 years old, I could pretend I was merely hunting and draw no attention if the agents spotted me. Both barrels from my shotgun notified those working the still of any undesired folks approaching, and I was to walk away none the wiser of their fate. Nobody wanted a child like myself with such a bright mind and promising future to end up in the penitentiary. All the precautions and forewarnings would be for naught, however. One cold and foggy morning, I was loafing about the still with my uncle and two of his friends, a pair of brothers from around Clarksville. We were caught unawares by a pair of agents. The fog had concealed their approach until it was too late. They perhaps would have reacted in a less rash manner had they the time to prepare for their arrival, but under the circumstances, their sense of self-preservation took over. My uncle had said more than once he had no intention of going back to the penitentiary, and when the agents told us to show our hands, he opened fire instead. The roar of his shotgun scared the daylights out of me. I dropped to the ground and buried my face as far as I could into the leaves. It was over in seconds. When I dared raise my head, the agents were both dead, and the younger of the Clarksville boys was minutes from the same. The older brother did his best to make his siblings' last moments as comfortable as possible. My uncle was already dragging the agents' bodies off to bury them. This was all going on around me, but I couldn't form a clear thought or word. It was probably half an hour before I could stand. I walked over to where my uncle was digging, and he threw me a shovel. Nothing was said for the next hour. The ground was darn near frozen and made the task even longer and arduous. We got the holes dug and rolled the agents into them. About that time, the older brother joined us. He began digging another hole nearby, and my uncle joined him, leaving me to fill in the ravineurs' graves. The younger boy was retrieved, and the two of them carefully laid him in and covered him. I don't believe a single word was spoken the rest of the day. My uncle simply looked over at the remaining brother, nodded his head goodbye. We all went our separate ways. Nothing else regarding that morning was ever spoken of. Until today, of course. The events of that foggy morning would turn out to be a dark omen of our lives to come. Word around was that the remaining Clarksville boy wandered the country, riding trains until World War II broke out. It said he went up into Canada and joined the army, supposedly died around Dunkirk. As for my mama's brother, he kept at making liquor until 1937 when he was shot in an argument over a woman and died. I guess you could say I came out lucky, as compared to the others. Mama made sure I kept focused on my schooling. I got my diploma the year America joined the war and was one of the first in the county to join up. For some crazy reason, the Lord watched out for me. Despite 3 years of combat, constantly being shot at by Jap snipers, I didn't get as much as a hangnail. After the government cut me loose, I used that GI Bill and enrolled at Stephen F. Austin and stayed around to teach after I finished. That's where I met your granny. You know the rest after that. We moved up here to Fayetteville so I could teach. I'm telling this now, after all these years, because I know I ain't got much time left. I don't want to go to my maker with this secret on my conscience. The fact is, boy, I've been walking around every day since then, expecting to meet some grisly ending because of what I was part of. It was a big part of why I went to war. The weight of being complicit in 2 murders is a heavy thing to carry through life. Whether I was the one who pulled the trigger doesn't much matter. I chose not to tell anyone. That makes me just as guilty, whether it's in the eyes of the law or the Lord's. For the sake of your soul, be a good man and live a good life. If you do that, your end will be a peaceful one. God bless you, and thank you for allowing an old, scared man to get some small bit of peace.